What if the greatest catastrophe in human intellectual history never happened? Picture this: 48 BCE. Julius Caesar stands in Alexandria, Egypt's jewel city, as flames consume the harbor. Ships burn, smoke blackens the Mediterranean sky, and in the chaos, the greatest repository of human knowledge, the Library of Alexandria, faces its moment of destiny. History tells us Caesar's fire spread, that scrolls ignited, that hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, the accumulated wisdom of millennia, turned to ash in a single catastrophic night. But what if Caesar made a different choice? What if, in those desperate hours, he ordered his men not to abandon the harbor, but to form a human chain? What if Roman soldiers, those masters of engineering and discipline, created a firebreak that saved humanity's memory? The implications would echo through every century that followed. The Renaissance might have arrived 1,000 years earlier. The Dark Ages might never have been dark at all. The entire trajectory of human civilization would have pivoted on that single decision. Today, we journey through an alternate timeline, one where knowledge survived, where Caesar became not the destroyer of wisdom, but its unlikely savior, and where the course of human history bent toward enlightenment centuries before our own world achieved it. Prepare yourselves. We begin.
The night that changed everything. October 16th, 48 BCE. Julius Caesar had pursued his rival Pompey to Egypt, only to find himself trapped in Alexandria with a handful of legions, surrounded by a hostile army of 20,000 Egyptian soldiers loyal to young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. In our timeline, Caesar ordered the harbor burned to prevent the Egyptian fleet, 400 ships, from cutting off his escape route. The fires spread. The library, situated near the waterfront, caught flame. An estimated 400,000 scrolls were destroyed. But in this alternative history, something different happened. As the flames began to spread from the harbor toward the museum district, Caesar received urgent intelligence from his scouts. The winds were shifting south-southwest, directly toward the library complex. The fire would reach it within hours. Caesar faced an impossible choice: maintain the harbor blockade and lose the library, or divert precious military resources to save it, potentially allowing the Egyptian fleet to regroup. The historical Caesar, pragmatic, ruthless, would have let it burn. But our Caesar, having spent time in the library during his earlier Egyptian visit, having witnessed its scholars debating astronomy and mathematics, made a different calculation. The Egyptians can build more ships, but those scrolls represent the work of 10,000 minds across 1,000 years. That cannot be rebuilt. He ordered it.
The human chain. What followed was one of the most extraordinary engineering operations in Roman military history, an operation that never happened, but could have. 3 cohorts, approximately 1,500 men, were pulled from defensive positions. Using the Roman military's legendary organizational precision, they formed bucket brigades from the Nile, through the city streets, directly to the library complex. Simultaneously, combat engineers created fire breaks by demolishing buildings in the fire's path. The museum's own scholars and librarians joined the effort. Slaves were freed on Caesar's order to help evacuate the most precious manuscripts to the royal palace, which sat on higher ground away from the harbor. For 14 hours, Romans and Egyptians worked side by side, enemies united by something greater than their conflict. The fire consumed the waterfront. Dozens of warehouses burned, but the library stood. When dawn broke on October 17th, Caesar surveyed the damage. The harbor was destroyed. His escape route remained closed. But behind him, the Library of Alexandria still stood, smoke-stained but intact, its 400,000 scrolls preserved. The Egyptian commanders, witnessing Caesar's sacrifice of military advantage to save their cultural heritage, sent envoys. Within 3 days, a truce was negotiated. Within a week, Ptolemy XIII was deposed and Cleopatra installed as sole ruler. But the consequences of that night would extend far beyond Egypt's throne.
The realization. Caesar did something else that October night, something that would transform his own historical legacy and alter the course of human knowledge. He ordered a complete census of the library's holdings. For the first time in its 250-year history, every scroll, every manuscript, every tablet was cataloged. Greek scholars worked alongside Roman officers, creating an index of human knowledge. They discovered the library contained not 400,000 individual works, but 400,000 scrolls, representing approximately 90,000 distinct works. Among them, Aristarchus's calculations proving the Earth orbited the Sun, 1,800 years before Copernicus. Eratosthenes' accurate measurement of Earth's circumference, Hero of Alexandria's steam engine designs, Ctesibius's hydraulic inventions, the complete works of Archimedes, all of Euclid's mathematics, the astronomical calculations of Babylonian priests, Egyptian medical texts describing surgical procedures that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 19th century. Caesar, the military commander and politician, began to see something his contemporaries missed. That knowledge was power of a different kind, not the power to conquer territories, but the power to transform civilizations. He made a decision that altered everything that followed. He ordered copies, not just for Rome, for the world. He established the first imperial scriptorium, employing 500 scribes whose sole task was creating duplicate copies of the library's most important works. He commanded that one copy of every significant text be sent to Rome, another to Athens, another to Rhodes, and another to Carthage. He was essentially inventing information redundancy, the principle that preserved knowledge by ensuring no single disaster could erase it. But the evidence forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility, that Caesar's decision to save the library wasn't entirely his own.
Act 2. Accumulating Evidence. The Cleopatra Factor. Historical documents from this alternative timeline reveal something extraordinary. Cleopatra VII was not merely Caesar's political ally and lover, she was his intellectual collaborator. Recent analysis of recovered correspondence between Caesar and Cleopatra shows they discussed philosophy, mathematics, and governance with a sophistication that historians never associated with either figure. Cleopatra had studied in the museum's philosophical school, and she understood what the library represented, not just Egyptian prestige, but the accumulated intellectual capital of human civilization. And she convinced Caesar that saving it would make him immortal not as a conqueror, but as a preserver. The evidence suggests Cleopatra deployed her considerable diplomatic skills not just to save her throne, but to save humanity's memory. Letters indicate she spent the night of the fire personally directing the evacuation of manuscripts, choosing which to save first, mathematics and engineering over poetry, medicine over mythology, astronomy over astrology. Her choices would determine which knowledge survived to transform the ancient world.
The Roman Transformation. Within 5 years of the library's preservation, Rome underwent an intellectual revolution that should seem impossible. In 43 BCE, Roman engineers in Gaul constructed the first steam-powered water pump, using designs from Hero of Alexandria's manuscripts.
The technology spread rapidly, transforming mining operations across the empire. By 40 BCE, Roman architects were incorporating advanced mathematical principles from Euclid and Archimedes into their constructions. The Pantheon, built in our timeline in 125 CE, was completed nearly 150 years earlier, with an even larger dome made possible by mathematical calculations preserved from Alexandria. In 38 BCE, Caesar's adopted heir Octavian, who would become Augustus, established the Imperial Academy in Rome, a direct copy of Alexandria's museum. He recruited Greek scholars by offering them Roman citizenship and generous stipends. Knowledge flowed from Egypt to Rome and from Rome throughout the empire. But the most remarkable changes occurred in medicine. Roman military physicians, equipped with translated Egyptian surgical texts, reduced battlefield mortality rates by an estimated 40%. Techniques for wound cleaning, infection prevention, and even early forms of anesthesia spread through the legions. The famous Roman military medicine that saved countless lives in our timeline became exponentially more advanced. The survival rate for wounded soldiers tripled within a generation.
The Great Translation Project. In 35 BCE, Augustus initiated what historians would later call the Great Translation Project, an imperial mandate to translate all significant Greek and Egyptian texts into Latin. This seems mundane until you consider the implications. Knowledge that had been accessible only to Greek-educated elites now became available to every literate Roman citizen. The barriers between cultures began to dissolve. Within 20 years, over 10,000 works had been translated. Public libraries, equipped with Latin versions of Greek mathematics, philosophy, and science, opened in every major Roman city. The literacy rate in urban Rome climbed to nearly 40%, compared to perhaps 10 to 15% in our timeline. But this represents just one piece of a much larger puzzle hidden in the manuscripts themselves.
The Astronomical Revolution. The most remarkable discovery involves what Roman astronomers accomplished with access to complete Babylonian and Greek astronomical records. By 30 BCE, Roman scholars had not only confirmed Aristarchus's heliocentric model, they had refined it. Using Babylonian mathematical techniques and Greek observational data, they calculated planetary orbits with stunning accuracy. An astronomical text from 28 BCE describes Mars' orbital period as 687 days, exactly correct. It calculates the astronomical unit, Earth-Sun distance, at 150 million kilometers, off by less than 1%. These calculations wouldn't be achieved in our timeline until Kepler's work in the 1600s. By 25 BCE, Roman observatories, equipped with sophisticated orreries based on Alexandria's designs, existed in Rome, Athens, and Alexandria itself. Wealthy Romans paid astronomers to calculate their birth dates using heliocentric models. The intellectual paradigm shift was complete. Romans knew the Earth orbited the Sun 1,600 years before our timeline's Copernican revolution.
The medical miracle. But the truly mind-bending implications emerged in Roman medicine. Egyptian medical papyri, preserved in the library, contained knowledge that seemed almost supernatural to contemporary observers. Descriptions of blood circulation 1,500 years before William Harvey. Surgical techniques for cataract removal. Protocols for infection control that wouldn't be rediscovered until Lister's work in the 1860s. By 20 BCE, Roman hospitals, yes, hospitals, institutions that didn't exist in our timeline's Roman Empire, operated in major cities. They combined Egyptian medical knowledge with Roman organizational efficiency. Mortality rates from common diseases dropped precipitously. Life expectancy in urban Rome increased from perhaps 25 years to 40 years, a change that would take our timeline's Europe another 1,800 years to achieve. The population of Rome swelled to over 2 million, sustained by aqueducts designed with Egyptian hydraulic engineering and food preservation techniques unknown in our timeline.
The engineering renaissance. The evidence extends beyond medicine and astronomy into the realm of engineering marvels that seem like science fiction. In 15 BCE, Roman engineers completed the first automatic temple based on Hero of Alexandria's designs, a religious shrine where miraculous doors opened automatically, libations poured themselves, and mechanical birds sang, all powered by hydraulics and pneumatics. While primarily used for religious spectacle, the underlying technology spread rapidly. By 10 BCE, Roman bathhouses used automated heating systems. Water mills employed geared mechanisms to increase efficiency. The level of mechanical sophistication in the Roman Empire was approaching that of medieval Europe's peak, a millennium ahead of schedule. In 5 BCE, a Roman inventor named Marcus Vitruvius Polia, known to history as Vitruvius, published De Mechanica, a comprehensive treatise on engineering that incorporated Greek mathematics, Egyptian hydraulics, and Roman construction techniques. It became the engineering textbook for the next 3 centuries. The alternative Roman Empire was undergoing its industrial revolution 1,800 years early. And then, everything accelerated.
Act 3. The Big Picture. The Knowledge Cascade Effect. What historians discovered studying this alternative timeline reveals a profound principle. Preservation of knowledge creates a cascade effect, where each generation builds incrementally on the last rather than rediscovering what was lost. In our timeline, the destruction of the library created what we call knowledge gaps, periods where humanity forgot what previous civilizations knew. The Roman Empire fell, and Europe lost Greek mathematics, engineering, and medicine for centuries. The Islamic Golden Age preserved some knowledge, but much was still gone forever. This alternative timeline demonstrates what happens when that chain remains unbroken. By 1 CE, the Roman Empire possessed technology and scientific understanding that our timeline wouldn't achieve until the Renaissance or later. But more importantly, they possessed something else, a culture that valued knowledge preservation and transmission. Augustus established imperial archives in every province. He mandated that all official documents be copied and stored in multiple locations. He created a postal service specifically for scholarly correspondence, allowing philosophers in Britain to debate with astronomers in Alexandria. The infrastructure of knowledge itself was revolutionized. The Christian transformation. This forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about religious history. When Christianity emerged in the 1st century CE in this alternative timeline, it encountered a Roman Empire with dramatically higher literacy rates and scientific sophistication. The religion's spread occurred not among primarily illiterate populations, but among people who could read both Scripture and Euclid. Early Christian scholars, educated in the imperial academy system, approached theology with the same mathematical rigor they applied to geometry. They debated not just faith, but harmonization of faith with astronomical observations, medical knowledge, and natural philosophy. By 200 CE, Christian monasteries had become centers not just of religious devotion, but of scientific inquiry. Monks copied not just Bibles, but mathematical treatises and medical texts. The concept of natural theology, studying God's creation through science, emerged 6 centuries earlier than in our timeline. The conflict between science and religion that characterized our timeline's medieval period simply never developed. They evolved as complementary rather than competing frameworks. When Rome fell, and it still fell, though differently and later, the knowledge didn't disappear with it.
The Mediaval Divergence. The Western Roman Empire collapsed in this timeline around 520 CE, nearly a century later than our timeline, sustained by more advanced technology and medicine. But the collapse looked different. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Rome inherited functioning schools, libraries, and a literate administrative class. The Dark Ages never got dark. Monasteries, already hybridized as religious and scientific institutions, preserved and expanded the knowledge base. By 700 CE, Frankish kingdoms operated water-powered mills with gear systems. Anglo-Saxon monasteries taught heliocentric astronomy alongside scripture. Medical schools in Italy performed surgeries using techniques preserved from Egyptian manuscripts. Recent breakthroughs in studying this alternative timeline suggest that the Islamic Golden Age, when it emerged, encountered a Christian Europe that was already scientifically advanced. Rather than one civilization enlightened while another languished in darkness, both bloomed simultaneously. The translation movements went both ways. Arabic texts on algebra and optics flowed into European universities, while Latin texts on mechanics and medicine entered Baghdad's House of Wisdom. The cross-pollination created an exponential acceleration of discovery.
The Industrial Revolution that never was. By 1000 CE, in this alternative timeline, Western Europe had achieved a level of technological sophistication equivalent to our timeline's early 1700s. Water-powered machinery operated textile mills. Coal mining used steam pumps designed from Hero's manuscripts, refined over a millennium. Blast furnaces produced high-quality steel using techniques that combined Roman metallurgy with constant refinement. But here's where it gets strange. The full Industrial Revolution as we know it never quite happened. Why? Because the technological advancement occurred gradually over 1,000 years rather than explosively over a century. Society adapted incrementally. Labor-saving devices emerged slowly enough that social structures evolved alongside them, rather than being disrupted by them. The catastrophic social upheaval of our timeline's Industrial Revolution, child labor, urban squalor, mass exploitation, largely never occurred. The transition from agricultural to mechanized society happened over 30 generations instead of 3. By 1200 CE, this alternative Europe had achieved a technological level equivalent to our 1850s, but with dramatically different social structures. Guilds had evolved into something like modern professional associations. Labor rights had developed over centuries. Universal education had been gradually implemented as the value of literacy became undeniable. It was a gentler, more humane path to modernity. The exploration paradox. This leads to a profound paradox. In a world where knowledge progressed more steadily, the age of exploration happened differently, and arguably less destructively. By 1300 CE, European navigators possessed accurate world maps, precise astronomical instruments, and ships designed with sophisticated mathematical principles. They knew approximately where other continents lay because they had access to ancient geographical texts that hadn't been lost. When they reached the Americas, which happened around 1380 in this timeline, a century before Columbus, they encountered indigenous civilizations with their own advanced knowledge. And because the European visitors came from cultures that had spent 1,400 years valuing knowledge preservation and exchange, their approach was fundamentally different.
Rather than conquest and plunder, the initial contact looked more like intellectual exchange. European diseases still devastated native populations. That tragedy couldn't be prevented. But the cultural destruction was far less complete. Aztec mathematical texts were translated and preserved. Incan engineering techniques were documented and studied. Native American agricultural knowledge transformed European farming. The collision of civilizations remained tragic, but knowledge survived.
Act 4. The Ultimate Questions. The Price of Paradise. The most profound implications emerge when we consider what this alternative timeline reveals about our own. In this world, where Caesar saved the library, where knowledge cascaded unbroken through the centuries, humanity reached technological modernity roughly 500 years before our timeline. By 1400 CE, they possessed technology equivalent to our 1900s. But they also reached the atomic age early. Historical records suggest that by 1450 CE, corresponding to our mid-1400s, the era of Gutenberg and early Renaissance, alternative timeline physicists had achieved nuclear fission. They possessed the theoretical knowledge from ancient Greek atomism refined through 1,500 years of uninterrupted scientific progress. And they faced the same terrible choice our timeline confronted in 1945. The difference, they made it with 500 more years of accumulated ethical philosophy and moral reasoning behind them. The weapons were developed, tested once in an uninhabited region, and then, by international consensus, banned. A global council established in 1455 prohibited nuclear weapons development. The technology existed, but human wisdom, matured over centuries of continuous philosophical tradition, prevented its military use. It suggests something profound, that the length of time a civilization has to morally mature matters as much as its technological sophistication.
The Communication Revolution. By 1500 CE, in this alternative timeline, our Renaissance era, they had achieved what we would recognize as the Information Age. Telegraph systems, based on principles of electromagnetism, developed continuously since ancient observations connected major cities. Mechanical computers, sophisticated descendants of the Antikythera mechanism, performed calculations in universities. The printing press had existed for 300 years, making books so abundant that private libraries of 1,000 volumes were common among merchants. Mass literacy reached 80% in urban areas. Scientific journals, like our timelines but existing since the 1200s, created a global community of researchers. Knowledge flowed freely across linguistic and national boundaries. Disease had been largely conquered through vaccines developed in the 1300s and antibiotics discovered in the 1400s. Average life expectancy had reached 65 years. The population of Earth stood at 1.5 billion, sustained by scientific agriculture, but kept from explosive growth by widely available birth control methods developed from ancient Egyptian techniques. It was, in many ways, a paradise of enlightenment. But it raises uncomfortable questions about our own timeline.
The Dark Mirror. What historians discovered next would change everything about how we understand our own history. When researchers compared the alternative timeline to ours, they found something disturbing. The alternative world, for all its advancement, had lost something essential. The very gradualness of their progress, the unbroken chain of knowledge, meant they never experienced the explosive creative revolutions that characterized our timeline. They never had a renaissance, because they never had a dark age to rebel against.
They never had an enlightenment because irrationality never dominated. The alternative timeline progressed steadily, incrementally, rationally, but it produced fewer Leonardos, fewer Shakespeares, fewer Beethovens. The artistic and creative explosions that characterized our timeline's recovery from ignorance simply never occurred. It suggests a disturbing possibility that humanity's greatest creative achievements might require the friction of loss and recovery, that forgetting and rediscovering might be more creatively productive than never forgetting at all. The most profound implications emerge when we consider what this means about catastrophe and progress, about whether destruction might sometimes be generative rather than merely destructive. The library's destruction in our timeline was a tragedy, but it was a tragedy that created hunger, a hunger that drove the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, a hunger to recover what was lost that perhaps drove us to reach beyond what the ancients ever achieved. The alternative timeline had everything we lost, but maybe they lost something we gained through our losses.
Conclusion. We began this journey asking, what if Caesar saved the Library of Alexandria? We've seen a world where knowledge cascaded unbroken through the centuries, where the Dark Ages never darkened, where humanity reached modernity half a millennium early, bringing wisdom to match its weapons, where the greatest catastrophe in intellectual history never occurred. It's a world many would choose over our own, a world of reason triumphant, of continuous progress, of knowledge preserved and built upon, rather than lost and painfully recovered. But we've also discovered something unexpected, that our timeline, with all its tragedies and book burnings and lost knowledge, might have sparked something the alternative timeline never quite achieved, the explosion of creativity that comes from recovery, the hunger for knowledge that comes from having lost it, the revolutionary breakthroughs that come not from steady progress, but from paradigm-shattering rediscovery. Perhaps both timelines are simultaneously right. Preservation is essential, but so is the creative destruction that comes from loss and recovery. The historical consensus recognizes both truths. We should preserve everything we can, while understanding that humanity's relationship with knowledge is more complex than simple accumulation, that forgetting and remembering might be as essential to our nature as learning itself. Caesar stands in Alexandria on that October night in 48 BCE, watching the harbor burn. In one timeline, he lets the fire spread, and human history takes the path we know. Tragic loss, followed by centuries of darkness, then explosive creative recovery. In the alternative timeline, he saves the library, and history follows a different path, enlightened progress without the hunger that loss creates. Which world would you want to inhabit? Which Caesar would you want to be? The history contains infinite branches. The mysteries multiply with each choice. The journey through all possible pasts continues. But in every timeline, one truth remains, that humanity's relationship with knowledge, whether preserving it or recovering it, defines our civilizations more than any empire or conquest. And perhaps the real question isn't which timeline is better, but what our timeline struggles have made us capable of achieving.
Would you have been the soldier in Caesar's human chain, choosing knowledge over tactical advantage? Would you have risked your life to save scrolls written in languages you couldn't read, preserving wisdom you couldn't understand, for a future you would never see? That choice, to value knowledge above immediate survival, to preserve for generations unborn, is the choice every generation faces. And the answer determines what kind of ancestors we become.